I am here with Adam Aronovich, and I'm really excited for this because when I found your work, Adam, I was really triggered. And I'm sure you get that a lot. And that's always a sign to me to actually start engaging with something when I'm really triggered by it. So yeah, I've been following your work for quite a while now, and I just really felt like I wanted to share you and your messages with the audience. So, welcome. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My pleasure to speak with you and share this with people.
Yeah. Let's just start with a little bit about yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Right, well, my name is Adam, and I do a bunch of different things. Right now, I'm in Mexico, mostly a family man, but also I have a platform called Healing from Healing that I started a while ago as a way to humorously criticize some things that I felt were worthy of criticizing within this continuum of psychedelics, healing, wellness, culture, New Age spirituality, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, one of the main things that I'm doing at the moment. And also, I'm working still, facilitating retreats and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Well, we'll definitely hear more in depth about the work that you do over the next hour or so. I want to start our conversation off with psychedelic narcissism. I don't think I've ever talked about this on the show, but it's definitely worth digging into. So let's start there. How have you come to understand psychedelic narcissism?
Well, I mean, I think like most of the things that I try to communicate about or spark conversations about, they come from my own personal lived experience, both individually, but also facilitating and researching this phenomena, not necessarily directly, but just as a byproduct of the things that I have been researching in the last few years. And yeah, this concept of psychedelic narcissism, can be very triggering. And it's still kind of like something that is in development to like really pinpoint what that means or whether that's a good term to use at all. Everything is in constant revision. But I think in the most basic sense, it relates to the sort of phenomena that happen when we have access to extremely powerful technologies such as psychedelic substances, and yet we haven't really figured out good epistemic frameworks to make sense of those experiences in a way that actually bring about applied embodied knowledge and wisdom, as opposed to most of the things that we see in these spheres, which are really ungrounded, unhinged belief systems that then give rise to ways of being that are not necessarily beneficial either for individuals or the communities that these individuals might be a part of. Generalization, of course, yeah, there's all sorts of different perspectives on it, and I'm sure there's a lot of grounded perspectives on it as well. But I think, just as a cultural reference, yeah, like we have to understand what is the culture that surrounds these modern uses, and then see, how from these cultures emerge the, epistemics of it, which is like, how do we make sense of information? How do we make sense and sense make and meaning make these experiences, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So, the narcissist part refers to one of the main components, I guess, of the culture that surrounds psychedelics, yeah, which is very much embedded within the dominant ideologies of today that are oftentimes rendered invisible when we don't really pay attention to the underlying ideologies and cultural frameworks that we're using to make sense of these experiences. Yeah, and many of them are cultural frameworks that are hyper-individualistic, for example, yeah, that kind of like put the individual in a pedestal and prioritize the inner experience and lived experience of individuals without like really acknowledging that it actually is a ongoing intersubjective dialogue happening all the time where we always have to put our own subjective experiences in dialogue with other people's experiences, but also cultural frameworks and sense-making frameworks and so on and so forth. So we come to a moment in time where within the healing spheres and the psychedelic spheres, there is a kind of like an overwhelming sense that my own personal experience is the ultimate arbiter of, absolute truth, as in, like, this is my truth, and we cannot argue with that. And a lot of people use that to kind of like propose their own truth as being just as valid as intersubjective facts, or in opposition to other ways of creating knowledge, evidence-based and so on and so forth. And, that gives rise to a certain experience of narcissism. Narcissism is a word that I don't like anymore as much, because I think it's being overused quite a lot in all sorts of different contexts, particularly in kind of like insta therapy and the chronically online therapeutic spheres, where now narcissism has just come to mean everything that we don't like about another person that somehow we perceive to have damaged us in a certain way. Selfishness is now narcissism, for example, right? Like somebody acted in a selfish way, like that person is a malignant narcissist. So, narcissism nowadays, narcissist is a label that carries kind of like a lot of loaded assumptions about what that means. But when I use narcissism in this context, I just mean, I guess, that particular kind of like intrapsychic dynamic, whereas our own personal opinion becomes absolute truth. Mm-hmm. And we're unable to really engage in dialogue about what actually those experiences might mean beyond our own assumptions and cultural programming.
Yeah, it's very damaging when we believe that our personal truth is the ultimate truth, especially when that is kind of amplified by such a powerful psychedelic state and then a culture that might support that. Why is it so dangerous, do you think, to enforce these personal truths that we find out through psychedelics onto everyone and to treat them as ultimate truth? What's the damage there that can be done?
Well, I mean, it's not even about enforcing them as ultimate truths for everybody. It's even about our personal experience, like enforcing them as like oftentimes we tend to take psychedelic experiences as being more real than reality. Yeah, this is kind of like one thing that I found throughout many years of working with people. People go into ceremony, they drink ayahuasca, whatever it is their experience, and then they come up on the other side like really mind blown, right? Like this aha moment. And then whatever happens at ceremony is very easy to interpret as like, oh, I was shown. Like this is something like really, I was shown something that I haven't seen before. I was shown a point of view that I haven't thought about before. I was allowed to peek through the veil in kind of like this esoteric manner. And that must be more true than truth in a sense, because I only had access through this like really mind-blowing mystical experience. But like the more that we walk this path, we realize that that's not always truth. Like psychedelics don't always show us things that are truth in that sense. And it can be very, very deceiving when we start addressing those experiences as they must be truth because they were shown to me in this non-ordinary state or this altered state or through the agency of this particular plant. Yeah. Whereas, I guess like good facilitators nowadays do have a good grasp of the need to think metaphorically about these sort of experiences and to unravel symbolic meaning and to, kind of like, in a way, address psychedelic experiences in the same way that we would address a dream or a vision, and not necessarily in a literal sense. And I mean, this has very practical implications when it comes to the intersection between psychedelic work and therapy, for example, or the healing spheres, right? Because, for example, when it comes to, this is like a very difficult topic to talk about, but probably something that is worth just mentioning. There is a particular orientation nowadays within, I don't know how to characterize it. Maybe pop psychology, but not quite, because some of this does have validation within mainstream cycles. But let's say there is a lot of weight nowadays to childhood trauma within healing culture. right? Like childhood trauma is perceived to be the ultimate origin of pretty much every affliction that we experience as adults. Yeah, and this is not to diminish from the importance of early childhood experiences in how they shape our personality and coping mechanisms and patterns of behavior and relational patterns and so on and so forth. But there's also, that overemphasis on childhood trauma is also coupled with the idea that psychedelics are one of the best ways that you can actually reach in and discover or uncover the ultimate source, right, of whatever is afflicting us through remembering or coming to terms with those childhood experiences. And this is an extremely tricky topic, right, because even within mainstream psychology, for decades, there has been this debate, right, like the memory wars, it's called, whereas many kind of like psychologists more from psychoanalytic orientations were using all sorts of techniques to allegedly recover suppress or repress memories from childhood, right? We're saying like the key to unlock all of the, afflictions is to like really find these techniques that can like really dig into those childhood experiences. But then other people were like, well, there's a lot of problems with assumption, right? Because we know memory is fallible. We know a lot of these allegedly recovered memories of childhood tend to be confabulations, or at least like half-truths based on some kernel of truth, but then completely distorted through projection and all sorts of things that happen. But going back to psychedelics, when we have on one hand that assumption that childhood trauma is at the root of everything, and then the other assumption, which is like psychedelics are the best tool that we have to like get to the root of our childhood experience, and we put those together, we get to a point where people go into those experiences already with a story. Right? And that story is, I'm going into an ayahuasca retreat, or I'm going into a psilocybin experience, or I'm going to go because I need to get to the bottom of my trauma. And I need to be able to dig into my memory. And Mother Ayahuasca is going to show me all the fucked up things that happened to me as a child that I don't have access to because they're suppressed. Right? Like, this is a story that a lot of people go with when they do these things. This is a story that is very problematic. And if the facilitators that are facilitating that experience are not very skilled, or they don't have like a wide enough frame of reference to be able to help people make sense of these experiences, then we are doing a lot of iatrogenic damage. Yeah, like iatrogenic as in the sense of like iatrogenic, damage that is done by the treatment itself, or something that we're causing harm through the intervention itself. Yeah. And there's a lot of iatrogenic damage happening in the psychedelic world, precisely because the frames of reference tend to be very reductive. So, for example, right, if the facilitator is presenting ayahuasca already to a big group of people and say, like, hey, like, you guys are here, you traveled all the way to the Amazon to drink ayahuasca, and the purpose of ayahuasca is to show you your childhood trauma so you can work through whatever. This is a story that, this happens, right? Like, this is a normal, pretty standard narrative within the circles. And then, there's many things that can happen within that retreat. One thing that can happen, for example, is that a person will go through 5, 6, 7 ceremonies and, have certain experiences that had nothing to do with their childhood trauma. And these experiences may be really meaningful and significant, right? Like experiences of communion with the divine, like the visceral kind of experience of environmental, there's many things that you can also like be like all sorts of things. But then what happens, right? Because they were primed to think that the pinnacle of the ayahuasca experience is to unearth childhood trauma so they can actually do the work, right? If they don't experience that, they're very likely to be disappointed. No matter what else they experience, right? They're likely to be disappointed. They're like, oh, like I just had like these blissful experiences, or I just had like these, visions of the earth and deforestation and oil extraction and, whatever. But I didn't quite get what I needed, right? Like I didn't quite get what I wanted to get. I didn't get what I came here for, because there was no content whatsoever about my early trauma experiences. And then that person is disappointed, that person is upset, that person has not gotten the healing that they needed and this is absurd, because within those other experiences that person had, right, there might have been incredible bits and pieces of a certain awareness, right, or an increased understanding of something that is immediately and personally affecting them. And yet they weren't really able or receptive to it because the narrative that was given to them was a different one. And they didn't get that thing. Okay, so that's one scenario that is pretty common when we have so much weight in one way of understanding things. Another scenario that can happen, for example, is that that person might go into ceremony and actually have like really bizarre, troubling, experiences and memories, and something happened during that ceremony, and they kind of like have recollection of somebody that they knew when they were children doing something that they shouldn't have done, and they come out of ceremony and they're sure that a certain member of their family molested them when they were very small, something that they have never really considered. It wasn't really quite part of their narrative, but then they come out and like, oh, like this definitely happened, right? And this is an incredibly tricky situation to encounter, both obviously for the person that is experiencing it, but also for the person who is facilitating and has the role of helping that person make sense of the experience. Right, because, and again, like going back to kind of like the memory wires within more established psychology, this is something that we know already through many years of practice and research. It's kind of like a common theme with these techniques, right, that are meant to facilitate the recovery of suppressed or repressed memories. That a lot of people come out of it with some idea that something terrible happened to them, oftentimes by close family members, but not really able to substantiate it, or not really being able to like really say like this definitely happened, but rather like I think this might have happened, but I choose to believe it because then everything else would make sense. And that can have really, really, really big implications, obviously, not only for their lives, but the lives of other people who might get accused of doing certain things. And this is tricky precisely because we do know, right, that the incidence of child molestation and sexual abuse in children is high. I mean, it exists. But it isn't as high as you would think if you went to an Amazonian ayahuasca retreat where that was presented as like this is the thing that we're orienting towards. And this, one thing that I found out, for example, we had in the place where I was working and researching in the Amazon, we had like a wide variety of different teachers, and different teachers have different orientations. And some teachers had the orientation of like trauma-informed or trauma-based practices that really oriented towards priming people to experience these things and really priming them towards unearthing like the bad things that happened to them in childhood. Now, I don't know whether this is because of the cultural narratives that we have nowadays, right, or not, but most of my research was qualitative, right? So I would do interviews with people after they had finished the retreats. And it came to a point where I would do the interviews, and just from the narratives that people would share with me after the retreats, and the way that they would express, the way they would sense make and meaning make those experiences, I would have a pretty good idea of who the facilitators and the teachers were because I knew what their orientations were. So if you have a retreat of 24 people, and I interviewed from that retreat 7 or 8 people, and from those 7 or 8 people, 6 people talked to me about childhood trauma based on sexual molestation when they were children, right? Then you start realizing that there's a very, very, very big impact to what is the narrative that people are being presented with, and whether their experiences are primed in some way by the expectations of the facilitators and by the kind of like overarching story that what we are sharing ayahuasca is for, right? And the really interesting thing is that when you actually inquire about what those experiences were, almost nobody will tell you like, oh, like this definitely happened. Like I have access to a memory of something that absolutely, it's always very ambiguous. It's always very faint. It's always some sort of like, oh, like I feel like this might have happened, but I can't quite be sure. There's a feeling. There's an idea. There's a certain, kind of like a faint vision of something that might have happened and that person. But we get into a very tricky territory of confabulation, of the fallibility of memories, of projections, or whether our own personal prejudice is getting in the... and skilled facilitators know this, right? And they would say, well, let's not take things literally right out of the bat. Like, let's try to understand what that actually might mean in a more symbolic way. Your relationship with yourself, with that person, with sexuality, with so on and so forth, right? Yeah. But if we take a very literalist perspective, I mean, we say, well, that absolutely is something that we have to take into account because that almost certainly did happen to you when you were a kid and so on and so forth. Then we're already creating a new story for that person that might have like really important implications and consequences for their lives and other people's lives. And this is something that happens. I mean, these are very tricky things because, yes, there are people that did experience horrible things in childhood, including sexual molestation. Yes, there are situations where psychedelic experiences can help us get into those things and be able to process them better if we have suppressed or repressed them. Even the terminology of suppression and repression is something that is always controversial within psychology. Like, what is the actual validity or psychoanalytic terminology? Is that something that actually happened? Is that a real mechanism of the mind that we tend to suppress or repress events that were painful? It's not quite clear, right? Like there isn't like a really strong evidence-based assertion for either way. So a lot of that is very ambiguous, right? And it is very important for, I think like the bottom line of what we're trying to say is that it's very important for facilitators to be extremely aware of the ambiguity and fallibility of all of these frameworks. So we're actually able to address each experience for what it is, with a wide range of different epistemic orientations and allow the person to make sense of that experience in a way that is not causing more damage. Right? Like this is like the first thing in the Hippocratic Oath, like first do no harm. So this is kind of like what we're orienting. Like the first thing that we all have to be able to do as facilitators is to know how to not do harm, this iatrogenic harm that oftentimes can happen, where we are very insistent on particular frameworks or ideologies that aren't necessarily for the best benefit of the people that we're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, thank you for speaking into just, the damage that can be done with inexperienced facilitation. And we're seeing this more and more often because people are rushing into facilitation, not aware of these things, right? And it's very real. What are your thoughts around how we can kind of create neutral spaces, non-belief based containers for people to experience plant medicine?
Well, I mean, this is exactly, I guess, what my platform is about, right? Is illuminating the different ideological backgrounds that intersect and give rise to kind of like the modern healing culture. So healing culture is kind of like the term that I'm using to describe exactly this healing culture, which is at the intersection of all sorts of very big ideas and movements that intersect in this particular moment in time and are aided by psychedelics, right? So we're talking about, obviously, kind of like more mainstream or overarching political and economic ideas, such as late-stage capitalism and consumerism, and how these things condition the way that we approach what it means to be an individual in the world, right? Some of the main, let's say, in my perspective, some of the main attributes of neoliberalism, particularly within this particular moment, is, again, the emphasis on the individual as the ultimate unit of analysis and the ultimate actor in the world, right? Like the famous assertion of Margaret Thatcher back in the day, society is an abstraction. Well, like, this is kind of a perfect example, exemplifies perfectly, I think, my idea of how neoliberalism dictates our perception, right? Like society is an abstraction. The only thing that is real is the individual and the individual experience, right? Like the subjective experience now becomes the ultimate arbiter of what is true for me, okay? But oftentimes also it has to be for everybody else as well. So within those overarching ideologies of neoliberalism and the very real momentum of late-stage capitalism and consumerism and the way that everything in our culture is primed towards keeping those machineries of production and consumption going, there's also things that are more specific to the subcultures within healing culture, such as the new spiritualities, the rejection of more traditional religions, instead gravitating towards, for lack of a better term, kind of like what all of the emergent forms of experiencing spirituality that came with the New Age. There is, again, like extremely hyper-individualized, right? Like the New Age is like, my spiritual development is the best gift that I can offer the world. This is a mantra that you would hear over and over, particularly even in the ayahuasca retreat centers, like people who come and the first thing that they're told is like, you're very courageous to being here, and I want you to know that the most beautiful gift that you can offer the world is your own personal healing, your own personal development. It's kind of like this idea of trickle-down healing, right? The more you heal, the more you develop spiritually, the more you're going to have an impact on the world. Jules Evans has a very good term for this particular aspect of the modern spirituality, is evolutionary spirituality, right? Evolutionary spirituality pretty much refers to this very common conception that as we advance on our spiritual path and as we heal, we are, let's put it on kind of like very basic spiritual terms, we're vibrating on a higher frequency, right? Which is another way of saying we're superior to the other people who haven't done this work. We are superior, we're more evolved, right, than the sheeple who haven't done this work. And this is something that is very much ingrained within the spiritual milieu. But like this idea that if you're able to pull yourself out of the matrix and have psychedelics and do healing work and learn the narratives of what spirituality is within this thing, then somehow we are already above the masses. We're above the sheeple. We're more enlightened. We're awake. We're not sleeping anymore. Right? That is the evolutionary part of evolutionary spirituality, which is a cornerstone of the modern spirituality, which is also at the core of the spiritual renaissance in many ways. It's impossible really to disconnect the current, psychedelic reawakening without taking into account the background from which these things come. And a big part of that is that evolutionary spirituality that is very much based on New Age ideas of the individual. Yeah, that is also very much aligned with the neoliberal perception of the individual and the consumerist part of it. That's not the only one. There's all sorts of other things. Right? There's the spiritual, there's the conspiracy culture part of it, which is also very big and very important because these things go hand in hand. Okay, conspirituality is kind of like a new old word that has become fairly popular in the last 2 or 3 years because we've seen a massive blowout of conspirituality since COVID and a little bit earlier, even with QAnon and so on and so forth. Why does that happen? Why is conspiracy? And again, so talking about conspiracy culture is very tricky too. A lot of people get triggered. This is when I post about conspiritual epistemics in my page, this is where I get the most pushback and the most angry people. And some of them are right in some ways, yeah, that we can't really dismiss conspiracies just because of the term conspiracy, because we're terming something a conspiracy, so it must be bullshit. This is a very easy tactic to deflect responsibility. Obviously, we're not saying, okay, I'm saying we're talking about conspiracy theory. I'm not saying that there haven't been any conspiracies on history, or there are powerful people are not getting together behind closed doors to make nefarious plans for their own benefit and detriment of the rest of humanity. This shit happens every single fucking day. But it's not, the Jews or the Rothschilds or a handful of powerful family from the Illuminati lineages. This is just the simple workings of late-stage capitalism and corporate cronyism. Yeah, like these are just normal results of the system that is overarching our world at the moment. But what I mean when I talk about conspirituality is more the epistemics of it. And when I mean epistemics, like how do we make sense of things? What is the lens through which we analyze world events, right, to make sense of them? And the conspiritual epistemic framework is the thing that I'm mostly interested in and worried about, right? Because it's a kind of idea, it's a kind of belief system that will prime people to first and foremost always try and make sense of world events through that lens. So something happens that is of global significance that might impact our individual lives. Let's say COVID as a good example, right? And if that person is already primed to begin with to look at everything through that conspiritual lens, then the immediate response is going to be, oh, this is a pandemic, this is a fake thing that is being orchestrated by the Jews or the globalists or the Rothschilds or the World Bank. I mean, yes, okay, the World Bank is a tricky one. These people do have a degree of, wrongdoing embedded within the system. But, what I mean is like if we're already primed to interpret things in a certain way, then we're missing the real opportunity of being able to address very real structural problems in a way that is actually proactive, in a way that actually can enact some change in a way that actually can give us a clearer vision of how the world really works, right? It's like this meme, right? Like, yeah, I mean, we know there are really shitty things that are happening, right? But conspiratorial epistemic frameworks prime people to understand that as being the work of a handful of like really powerful people behind the scene, instead of the widely known group of really powerful people that are actually at the top of like the big corporations and so on and so forth. So I think like the problem with conspiratorial epistemologies is first and foremost that they deflect the sense making to a dead end, right? They prime people to actually start perceiving real things that are wrong in the world that should be addressed, but then that path ends up with xenophobia or anti-Semitism or racism or just like simple epistemic chaos. Like, oh, the reptilians are controlling humanity in 5D, as opposed to we have a real structural problem in late-stage capitalism with the way that we prioritize the financial bottom line over human welfare, right? Which is a much better conclusion than, oh, humanity is just enslaved to reptilians in the fifth dimension, right? So the conspiratorial framework is very much embedded within and baked in almost within healing culture, because for many, many, many decades, this has gone almost hand in hand. New Age spirituality and conspiracy epistemics have been enmeshed, I guess, ever since the 60s or the 70s. And it has been really difficult to unravel both of them or separate both of them from what it means for us nowadays.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot to unravel. And I don't think I fully understand all of it. And that's why I have you here. And I'm seeing some overarching themes that I want to throw at you, and you tell me if I'm hearing this correctly. So this idea of, healing culture and all the different kind of ways that it's influenced, it really comes down to focusing on the individual rather than the relational context. Am I getting that right? Was that kind of
that's a central piece of it, yes.
Yeah.
It's a hyper-individualistic focus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess where I'm having a hard time is, healing for oneself is important, but it's when we think that it's only for ourselves and we forget about the relational and the people around us, the community around us, the world around us, that it might start to get a little bit dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but it's exactly the orientation within healing culture, right, and all the different things that intersect there are precisely the ones that are priming more and more and more towards self-absorption, towards not necessarily healing per se, but the illusion of healing for the sake of actually developing narcissistic-like traits, where nothing else matters except my own yeah.
Wow. Can we get into that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, what really is healing? Yeah, let's start with that. Yeah, like healing is an interesting word. And it comes, etymologically, healing shares the same root with the word whole. Healing, whole. Both of those words come from a Proto-German word that means to bind things together. Yeah, to put things together. When we're talking about healing, we're talking about putting things together. We're talking about making oneself whole again. Yeah, the healing process is the process of taking all of the fragments of ourselves and putting them back together in a whole. Right? Now we can argue about what all those fragments are. Like, how do we get fragmented and where do those fragments go? Yeah, so some of those fragments may be really about, our own character development and coping mechanisms and dissociation that we experience due to early childhood experiences. Some of those fragments might be due to other more ubiquitous social things, for example, such as the very real realities of increased alienation, the dissolution of our social fabric, loneliness, which is one of the main problems of modernity, right? So wholeness as in we are inherently social beings that are experiencing more and more alienated, compartmentalized, lonely lives, particularly in the age of terminally online or chronically online people, yeah, like social media and so on and so forth. So some of those fragments are definitely have to be relational. How do we actually find wholeness, not only in ourselves, but in actually fostering communities, in strengthening our relationships, in nurturing those things that are not only about us, right, but in relation to. And this is not only within healing culture. I think, you know, like also within kind of like more mainstream medicine and mainstream mental health, there is an overemphasis on individual interventions and individual prognosis and individual everything. Like, for example, like the most common thing that happens, for example, when we're not feeling well, right? Let's say mentally. Like, there's something that is not quite right. We don't really have energy. We're feeling sad. There's a lot of despair. We go to a psychiatrist, and then, you know, we're diagnosed through the medical gaze, whatever that person sees, like whatever the expert sees in the narrative that we're saying, and we get diagnosed, and then we're prescribed most likely pills, right? Like 99% of psychiatric interventions are going to be pharmacologically based, so we're going to prescribe that treatment that is being handed down to us, and then we become passive consumers of whatever treatment or service is being handed down to us. But it's always kind of like a very, not always, things are changing, for the most part still, a very hyper-individualistic intervention, whereas we are made to understand that whether it's depression or anxiety or anything else we're experiencing, then the problem is located somewhere within our heads. Yeah, it's I mean, I know now there's like biopsychosocial blah blah blah, but you know the bio still holds a lot of weight. So the bio is still, for the most part, the main focus of everything, right? So we assume that if we're not feeling well, there's something wrong with us. There's something wrong in our brains. Like there's some neurochemical imbalance that can be fixed if we only find the right formula, the right drug for that. That's kind of like the main assumption. So it's hyper-individualized. And what that approach does is that it tends to render invisible the very real and very important links between the health of the individual and the health of the community, the health of the individual and the health of the society that individual is part of, the health of the individual and the health of the culture within which that person exists. And last but not least, the health of the individual and the health of the environment, which sustains the lives of that society, that community, and that individual. And these are things that are very seldom, not only are not discussed, but they're not even part of the discourse. They're not even part, right, of the conversation that that person might have with a physician. Now things are changing because, at least from the perspective of public health, yeah, we have a much greater awareness of some of the main drivers of depression, anxiety, and also all sorts of different physiological diseases, yeah, that are more psychosocial in nature, such as loneliness. Loneliness is, you know, a very real thing. Loneliness is one of the most pressing problems in most of the Western post-industrial late capitalist societies. So much so, right, that, well, this is something that like really struck me. A few years ago, I think probably 4 years ago or so, Theresa May was still the Prime Minister of the UK. I was in Europe for a conference, and I was reading the papers, and I came across a news article that basically says something like Theresa May, today the ex-Prime Minister of the UK, has appointed a member of her cabinet to be the Minister for Loneliness of the UK. And I read that, and I thought it was very funny. Like, what the fuck does a Minister for Loneliness do? Like, what is her job? And then the more that I looked into it, I started realizing, actually, well, you know, this is obviously not funny, but I started realizing that many countries in Western and Northern Europe had actually had the same thing. But they had appointed kind of like a member of the parliament or cabinet or whatever government function they had to address the epidemic of loneliness that was perceived to be sweeping through the societies, right? Loneliness is now has been identified as one of the most important risks to public health, right? So, if we are just addressing the brains of individuals with neurochemistry, where we're not addressing social factors, cultural factors, environmental factors, it's very, very difficult to talk about healing, yeah? Because we're not really healing, we're using Band-Aids. We're using a Band-Aid to mask some fundamental lack of something that is causing a particular experience to be experienced in a certain way, right? We're talking about culture, right? Like, culture is incredible. We are cultural beings. We exist within this onslaught of constant messaging that comes through us through culture, right? I mean, just in a very basic sense, when a person goes to therapy because they want to work on their sense of self-worth, right? Like, well, I don't love myself, I'm not confident enough, I'm not good enough, whatever it is. I mean, is it any wonder that it's such an ubiquitous problem in cultures where every single moment of our existence, through advertising, through subliminal messaging in culture, we're being told exactly the opposite. We're being told, well, of course you're not happy because you don't have this product yet. Of course you're not content because you haven't had this service yet. You're never going to be like those people in the billboard drinking wine and laughing and looking cute because you don't have these things yet. You have to continue running that hamster wheel. And if you really want to be happy, if you really want to be worthy, if you really want to work on your sense of self-love, then you need to know that you are not enough yet because you don't have all of that stuff that we want you to buy and consume. That's how consumerism works, right? Consumerism relies in its most fundamental way. It relies on creating an artificial vacuum inside of people that can only be filled with trash that nobody wants and nobody needs. So when the culture is out of balance, it's very difficult for individuals to feel good. We cannot talk about like healing individuals when we're not talking about also creating healthy cultures. Environments are kind of like the most obvious of all of these different dimensions. I mean, we know if we're not, if we're drinking water that is polluted, we're not going to be well. This is something that happens in many parts of the world all the time, every single day. I lived in the Amazon rainforest for 5 years, where the 4 or 5 main rivers that feed into the Amazon River, right? The Amazon River kind of like proper starts in the city of Iquitos, but before that, there's tributaries. There are big rivers that then converge in Iquitos and become the Amazon. There's the Marañón, there's the Tigre, there's the Guayaga. These are massive rivers that sustain thousands of communities in the riverbanks. In the last decade or so, like all of these rivers have been declared by the Peruvian government national environmental emergencies. Yeah, they're environmental catastrophes, whereas many of these rivers, in big stretches of these rivers, the waters have become so polluted by oil extraction that they cannot sustain life anymore. Everybody in the Amazon, well, all of the indigenous federations that rule or preside over these 5 rivers finally got together to come together and put kind of like a united front and say, like, we're not going to take this anymore because we're dying. We cannot grow crops. We have like diseases that science hasn't even heard of. It became a thing. But anyway, the point is, like, it's very easy to see. When our environment is dying, then obviously individuals are not going to thrive, right? So this is the kind of links between individual health and community health, individual health, social health, cultural health, environmental health, that neoliberal policies tend to be very good at invisibilizing. Because it's not in the interest of anyone to be able to actually acknowledge that a big part, the bigger part, the majority of individual human suffering is actually because of structural violence, because of the systems that are in place, because of the way that the world is configured in this very particular moment in time. And if we really want to address healing, right, then we would actually have to be much more engaged in political life. We would have to be more engaged in trying to change structures. We would have to be much more engaged in actually addressing power. Not reptilians in the 5th dimension, actual power, right? Like actual power, like the real people that are profiting at the expense of everybody else, corporations, governments, and so on and so forth. So healing culture does exactly the opposite. Healing culture primes individuals to hyper-focus on themselves. So like, the greatest gift that you can give the world is your own personal transformation. Not only that, there's worse narratives than that are repeated and parroted all the time. They say, the only thing that you can change is yourself, right? There's no point in social activism. There's no point in actually doing something in the world. The world is an illusion. The only thing that is true is your own inner experience. So you want to focus 100% of your efforts on yourself. You want to peel every layer of that onion. You want to get to the bottom of every single shitty thing that happened to you in childhood. You want to get to the nitpicking of every single relational friction that you ever had in your life, because that's the only thing that you have power on. Everything else is out of your reach. That's healing culture, priming people towards that insane self-absorption that then very easily derives on narcissistic traits. Is that clearer now?
Adam, I'm feeling incredibly called out, so thank you for that. I think if you went back and listened to some episodes from way back when I started this podcast, you would have some good critiques. It is
So
really important though what you are saying, because like I agree, it is so hyper individualized and hyper focused, and I personally totally had this narrative before where, you know, there's no end to the healing journey, like there's always deeper you can go. And while that may be true, it doesn't mean that you need to always go deeper and you need to continue that. Like at some point you can kind of look outside of yourself and at the world and see like, okay, I've done all this work on myself. Like, what can I give now? How can I contribute? Right? And you mentioned you spent a lot of time in the Amazon, and I'm really curious to hear about that, and kind of how that has informed your view of healing culture and society and the Western world. I guess, yeah. What did you notice about culture and relationships and society in the Amazon, and how has that kind of informed your work?
That's a great question. I have a lot of things that I can touch on. I want to say something about, you know, this never-ending healing journey. There's in psychoanalysis, I think it was Winnicott that when faced with the question about parenting, because parents are always worried that they're never good enough, right? Like they're never the best parents that you can be, because that's, you know, now that I have a daughter, I can like realize that. Like I'm always worried that I'm not doing my best as a parent. And you know, Winnicott, when faced with like the onslaught of parents that were really worried about not being good parents, came up with this term, which is like the good enough parent. So like you don't have to be the best parent all the fucking time, but you do have to realize that being good enough parent is probably good enough. Yeah,
it's
like
your
that's
best.
The most that we can.
It's the best.
It's the most that we can aspire. And I think when it comes to healing, that's exactly the same thing, right? When we don't have a sense of what it means to be healed enough, right? Then we get stuck in that loop. Whereas we get sucked into this endless vortex where there's always going to be one more workshop, there's always going to be one more thing, there's always going to be one more sound bath, there's always going to be one more whatever, more supplements. It's consumerism on steroids. Except now it's not oriented towards objects and status in that sense, it's towards personal development and status in that sense. And you see this on Instagram all the time. A lot of my inspiration is social media, because this is obviously in the pandemic where most people spend time. And I got really interested in the narratives and ideas that flow within these spheres, particularly in social media, right? And this is what's happening. There's like it's not a new concept. You know, like spiritual materialism, something that has been coined decades ago and has been in constant use in different iterations. But yeah, I mean, the way that hyper-individual, never enough kind of like healing consumption drives individuals towards narcissism and self-absorption and self-indulgence is very real, precisely because we don't really have that sense of healed enough, okay? And that's like when we come to what is the actual, we started talking about that before, what is the actual purpose of healing? What is the end goal here, right? Are we now healed enough that actually we're able to come back to life and come back to our relationships and enjoy the things that give meaning to our lives, right? When I teach these things or when I work with people, then that's oftentimes the way that I would approach this, right? Like I said, like, you know, we have to remember that by the end of the day, healing is not the end goal in itself. Healing is a vehicle towards us feeling whole enough, right? That we're in a moment in life when we're able to show up for life, that we're able to show up for relationships in a different way, that we're able to actually be present for the things that make life worth living, that we're able to show up for the things that provide meaning and sense to the lives that we want to live. Yeah. Right? And if we forget to do that transition, then we completely miss the point, and we're always going to spiral down into that self-absorbed, never-ending vortex of hungry ghosts looking for more and more and more and more and more and more and more healing, when actually perhaps we could have made that transition into actually being of service in the world, enjoying life, the recreational part of it, which we talked in the beginning, that maybe we go back to that later.
Yeah.
But
well,
yeah.
Yeah, okay, we'll get back to the Amazon bit in a second, because I do want to just pause here. How much do you believe, or how much have you come to understand that, psychedelic narcissism or the hyper-individualistic approach to healing, whatever you want to call it, how much does it have to do with control and discomfort in living with uncertainty in life?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna throw numbers around, but I think it's a huge part. And I think this is like one of the reasons, again, like why there's so much interlap between healing and conspiracy is precisely because they're both based on an illusion of control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't understand how the world works.
And I know the truth now, right? I know the answers now. Yeah.
It's not only that I don't know how the world works, I don't even know how to start making sense of the world. Yeah, because people don't have, I mean, for the most part, this is an overgeneralization. For the most part, we're not taught how to make sense of the world. We're, largely politically illiterate. We don't have a good sense of how the economy works unless you go and learn economy. Like, people really don't have a good grasp of what financial system is like, or the political system, or the food production chain of like how the fuck do we end up with a schnitzel on my plate that used to be an animal through this whole horrible, industrialized process of turning animals into produce. I mean, people have a very, very faint grasp of how the world works. And I think a lot of that is on purpose. It's not a conspiracy. It's just normal, power tactics like class war. I think the majority of people, there is a sort of ignorance that is enforced on the majority of people by, the class, Anyways, yeah. What was the question?
the how much of it has to do with control and discomfort of living in uncertainty, right? And
yeah, a huge deal of that has to do with control. I think we want to feel.
Yeah.
We live in incredibly entropic times. Yeah, like the world is dissolving before our eyes. The world order that we grew up with of post-industrial kind of neoliberal consumerism, it seems to be on its last, gasps. And I think a lot of people are afraid. Like, we don't know what the world is going to look like after collapse. We don't know what the world is going to look like when we start feeling more and more the real effects of climate, catastrophes. I don't know what the world is going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years after we're finished plundering the oceans and the Amazon is a desert and the world is 3 or 4 degrees warmer. And I think a lot of people feel that, even if not consciously, at least unconsciously. Actually, there's good terms nowadays in kind of more mainstream mental health for the sort of anxiety that is derived from that kind of like climate uncertainty, for example, or Generation Zers, who, when you poll them, the vast majority of them don't really have any expectations to live over 40. This is real, right? Like, people do have a huge, perhaps unconscious or so. I mean, you see the reactionary part of it too, which is very much embedded within conspiritual theories. Again, climate change is a hoax, right? This is just natural cycles of the world. It's always been like that, right? There's nothing strange about 90% of our species being projected to go extinct in the next 20 years. Nothing strange about it. It's just business as usual. People really buy into that, I think, because the terror of accepting truth is so great that we have to come up with these useful fictions just to distract our minds from reality. It's like, this is just the Rothschilds again trying to limit our freedom. Can you imagine, like, really understanding the data of environmental collapse and saying, like, this is just the Jews trying to impose communism on us again? But this is real, right? And this is a big part of the healing community that buys into these narratives, because the reality of the world collapsing and civilization unraveling before our eyes runs counter to this idea of evolutionary psychology that we're experiencing a massive transformation in consciousness. We're ascending to 5D. right? Like humanity is finally breaking free from the matrix and the reptilian overlords. I mean, it seems like that narrative, again, would prime people to interpret everything else as a sign that they're right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, everything has to die before, we can break through. Yeah, I mean, the world has to. And again, like this is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
The reality is too dire. The terror. This is kind of like classic Ernst Becker, right? Who kind of came up with this idea that most of our human motivations come from the terror of our own death. Yeah, like all of our coping strategies come from the knowledge of our own mortality. It's something similar, just on a planetary global scale, right? Like the way that we put so much effort in distracting ourselves from the real social, environmental, cultural realities of our times kind of like primes us to experience those things. So yeah, I mean, I would say that a huge deal of that has to be, based on that kind of denial for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really appreciative of how much this conversation is shining a light to those narratives that we tell ourselves and what's behind those narratives. And yeah, something that I'm really working on is, distinguishing truth versus my personal truth versus belief systems. I just had an experience with Iboga, which is, truth medicine in different ways. And after that experience, I was really able to kind of understand all the garbage that was in my head that honestly was formed from hanging out with a lot of people who believe in a lot of conspiracy theories, where it's like in Bwiti, which is the culture behind Iboga, like they confirm truth through the senses. So what do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you feel? Which, yeah, if we apply that to like what we see going on in the world with the environment, right? Like how can we actually deny that is true and happening before our eyes? It's wild. How have you come to understand distinguishing truth from belief? And like there is a difference between your personal truth and my personal truth, and then also truth that is true for everyone. So how have you come to kind of understand the nuances between that?
I mean, I don't know that I've come to understand all the nuances. I do know that I'm, like any other person, also completely at the mercy of my own biases. And this is something that requires constant attention and constant, introspection, and the ability, I think like the most important thing is the ability to correct course in the face of new evidence. And I think this is the thing that is so difficult for a lot of people, because we become so entrenched into identity, and identity becomes so entrenched in belief systems and perceptions of what the world is, and social dynamics, right? That then correcting course becomes almost impossible, because we face both our own cognitive dissonance, but also social ostracism. Yeah. And this is, I think, one of the main problems, right? Like a lot of people that, and this is, by the way, true across the political spectrum and across different areas of life, not only on spirituality. We see this in the left, we see this in the right, we see, all this, partisan, whatever, but it becomes very difficult for people to start questioning things publicly or out loud when the consequences of that is that you will be shunned by your peers, or that you might find yourself alone and needing to start over, finding people to relate to. This is a real problem. This happens a lot in conspiritual scenes, which is why I haven't really figured out how to do that very well. But my orientation, at least with the page, the original tagline of Healing from Healing was relentlessly humanizing each other. I think at some point that kind of got lost in my audience capture, because I started catering more and more to whatever gave me the best engagement. This is a different topic, but I think it's important just because you asked me that question. So, in a personal note, I did notice Healing from Healing is not old. It's new. It's a new project. It's barely a year old. And already from within that year, it has become quite popular. And already within that year, I have almost shut it down 3 times one time, the last time, I was away from it for almost 5 months or 6 months because I couldn't bring myself to do anything with it or post anything with it. And one of the main reasons is that I'm also very uncomfortable with certain aspects of that page or the orientation of it, because I do know and feel that at some point I did get caught up on that audience capture, which is a real phenomenon that happens when you're trying to cater to what you think is going to create the best response as opposed to what is really honest and truthful from within you. Yeah, I think you might relate to that also as a content creator, and like this happens all the time. Yeah. And I think that at some point I lost track of that original tagline, relentlessly humanizing each other. And the reason why that tagline was important to begin with was precisely, and then one of the main criticisms that I get all the time from people that don't like my page is that I'm perpetuating this narrative of othering the other, like the in-group and the out-group. And it's true. I recognize that happens sometimes because I'm not extremely skilled or mindful all the time about how these things might be perceived. And that happens. But that's not the intention, and that's not what I want to do. Right? The relentlessly humanizing each other tagline was kind of like my way to keep myself in check. Yeah. That we're not necessarily antagonizing anybody, but that actually we're bringing in closer and teach and educate in a way that lands in people as opposed to creating further distance. That's why humor was so important for me to begin with. Yeah, like there's a quote, I don't know whose quote it is, but it says, like, if you want to tell people the truth, you want to make them laugh, otherwise they will kill you, right? Like you can't just show up in somebody's face and tell them truth, because first of all, you're going to get your ass kicked. And secondly, you're just going to drive them further from that truth, because you're going to probably contribute to another layer of whatever coping mechanism and defense mechanism they have built to avoid seeing that truth. Right? So the relentlessly humanizing each other tagline should be the guiding light of this project. And it's now kind of start reassessing how to actually prioritize that and get out of the audience capture so that I can actually speak to the people that need to hear these things in a way that lands. Right? Like, hey, we're not making fun of you for believing bullshit. I mean, yes, but not only, right? We're also trying to illuminate why, we think that this particular belief system is not at your best interest, and it's not at the benefit of your community, and it's not in the benefit of actually making this world a better place. I do want to say, I do feel that most people in the conspiritual world that, are very, very much invested and embedded within both the new spirituality and the conspiracy, these people at heart, at least in the beginning, going to these things because they see something is wrong in the world, and they have an honest desire to make this world better. I don't think this is bad people at all. I don't think this is stupid people. I think there is a level of misinformation and disinformation that is difficult not to bite into. But at the core, I think the intention is right, and the heart is in the right place. And the humanizing each other tagline is how can we actually bring all of these ideas to revisit them and look at them from a different light, so we can actually use that intention and that honest wish to address real world problems in a way that is actually contributing to solve the meta crisis, as opposed to just making things worse, right? By creating these echo chambers and pockets of delusion where we're actually drawing people away from being able to perceive reality and address reality, and just providing kind of like these distractions or opportunities to lessen the impact of that terror by, feeling that we're in control because we think, whatever, there's nothing we can do because the Anunnaki are controlling our minds anyway.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, there's I feel like we could keep going down a rabbit hole around that. I want to talk about humor, because this is one of your tools. It's one of my tools as well. I see a coach weekly. I am a coach, and I get coached weekly. And in one of my coaching calls, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I uncovered this little, I call it gremlin, like that little voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit, yeah, that was saying that I wasn't good enough to do whatever the story was. I don't want to get into it, but I started laughing. And I was like, wow, I'm at the point now where I can actually laugh at these false narratives in my head that are kind of running the show. And it's been such a useful tool for me. Humor, being able to laugh at myself and, laughing and finding the irony, the joy in the healing journey and not taking it so seriously.
Yes.
Yeah. What are your thoughts around that? How do you use humor? Let's have some fun with this.
So I mean, I'm not a religious person. Not a, I consider myself, I guess, agnostic would be the thing. But I do think that there's one thing in this world that is divine, and that is humor. And that is the one attribute I think of humanity. There's a redeeming quality, right? Like Viktor Frankl, right? Like he wrote when he was kind of giving his account of being in the Nazi extermination camps and how, even in the worst imaginable situations, people were still able to find humor in daily life, and how people on the line to be gassed, they were still able to make these little jokes that kept their spirits up as much as they could, and how those people actually had, that spark of humanity that no matter how dehumanizing the circumstances were, it was impossible to rob them of that. So I think like humor in many ways is that redeeming quality, that we're able to come to terms with the absurdity of existence, with how mind-boggling and absurd the mere fact of life is, and that we get reminded daily that there's not much point in taking things seriously. There's kind of like this dichotomy, right, where once we understand the mystery, once we have once we can approach the mystery, and psychedelics can do that very well. I know this is why a lot of people are drawn to psychedelics. Once we have those kinds of experiences of awe that can come through psychedelics, but obviously not only. They can come in relationships, it can come in contemplating a beautiful flower in the garden, they can come from a sunset. But once we have a grasp of awe, of what real awe means, that sensation of being in the presence of the ineffable, of the mind-bogglingly mysterious, of the never-ending beauty and complexity of the world that we inhabit, and the circumstances of our nervous system and our beings being able to perceive those things the way that we do and interact with each other and love and cry, and there's kind of like this dual process that unfolds from it. The first one being we have to protect this at all costs. Yeah, there's something about the sacred that brings forth this need to take action and say, we can't let these corporations kill the rainforest. We can't let the machinery of corporate cronyism destroy this incredibly beautiful world that we inhabit. We have to do something about it. There's something that is awakened. Like this is too beautiful, mysterious, sacred to just lay down as everything goes down the drain. But at the same time, right, there's also that sense of the absurd that says, like, well, if we took every single little thing that happened in our lives, or every single little fact of the world that causes grief or anxiety or anger too seriously, we would be paralyzed every single waking moment of our lives. We have to learn how to thread lightly through this world too. Yeah, like we have to learn how to use humor as a tool to deflect a little bit from the impact of the horror and turn that. I mean, there's another one of those sayings that kind of get, a lot of people get credited for, but nobody really knows where it comes from. It says like, comedy is tragedy plus time. Well, like comedy equals tragedy plus time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like one of the things, right? Like the ability to laugh about the worst things that ever happened to us or other people. This is, one of the biggest gifts that humor provides, that lightness of being, that ability to make light of serious situations, to remind us that, yes, things are simultaneously very dire, very serious, and very important, but at the same time, everything is very stupid and nothing really matters, right? Like there's kind of like that duality.
Yeah.
Whereas if we learn how to navigate that, then we can provide a little bit of balance. So, you know, when people used to come to the Amazon and I was facilitating the workshops, that's one of the first things that I would say in our first kind of group meetings. I would say, you guys are here to do some of the hardest, most difficult work that you're ever going to do. And that needs to be taken very seriously. But also, it needs to be taken with a lot of self-humor and a lot of lightness. Because otherwise, it both becomes unbearably difficult and painful, but also we get stuck into that rabbit hole of like work, difficult pain, and we're back into kind of Christian theologies where suffering is the primary purpose of humanity. And no, we need to take it lightly. Yeah. It is important, but it is not that important. Yeah. In the great scheme of things, we're insignificant. That's what good perspective can provide. Our problems are incredibly important to us, obviously, but in the greater scheme of things, you know.
Yeah, it is that duality. It's that duality of, holding it all and holding both at once. It's the nature of our existence here on this earth, in this dimension. You know, maybe in the 5D, there's no duality and it's only 11 light, but here where we are, it is very dualistic and it is all of it.
Yeah.
And exactly what you said, that the humor, the way that it allows a lightness of being, even when we're dealing with such serious material, it is. Yeah. It's like it's like a source of humility to be able to laugh in those times.
That's exactly it, and this is why I think self-humor is one of the most important kinds of humor. And I personally don't trust anyone who doesn't have the capacity to make fun of themselves. And that's, it's real.
That's a great barometer of trust.
There's a lot of people out there that just go through life like taking themselves too seriously and, getting triggered when there's something pokes fun at them. And I mean, this is absurd. Yeah. What kind of advancement have you done in your spiritual unfolding if you're not able to see yourself with humor? I mean, this is absurd.
Were you always like this? Like, were you always someone who used humor a lot? Or was there a point where you were able to really start using humor as a tool?
I mean, I think...
Like, did you take yourself seriously once upon a time?
I mean, I mean, not really seriously. I mean, I still take myself seriously sometimes. I'm still figuring out how to walk that path. Like, for example, if I get a little bit too much pushback on some post or something, I get triggered. Like I get it, I mean, I feel it, like someone like, you're stupid, like you don't know anything what you're talking about. Like, I mean, sometimes I do take it personal. Like, it's difficult not to, and sometimes I actually learn a lot from it. I mean, I'm not closed off to criticism, even though I would prefer the kind of criticism that is obviously constructive and engaged in dialogue as opposed to, just like looking to hurt each other. But yeah, I mean, but then maybe after a few minutes that I get triggered, then I look at it again and I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm taking myself a little bit too seriously. And perhaps my own ego got a little bit bruised by that comment, and now it's back to making a little bit more fun about myself. I think it's a skill that we develop. I think if we're oriented towards humor, and we are able to want to consider ourselves also as targets for humor, and particularly self-humor, then I think it's a skill that we can develop over time, and something that is very healthy, something that I oftentimes prescribe also when I talk with clients or we talk with people and so on. It's like, let's develop a little bit of other tools other than just trying to understand why how your parents fucked you up. There's a few other words, for example, that nowadays are almost bad words within kind of healing culture, such as resilience, right? Like we don't necessarily want to encourage people to be resilient, because resilient implies that we're taking a degree of personal responsibility. But sometimes, people feel that that's not really their... I mean, again, this is another conversation. I'm not going to get into it. But resilience and self-humor are the two things that I oftentimes feel very important to actually encourage people to look into, right? Like, your problems are real, and there's all sorts of different social factors and so on and so forth that they're not your fault, but at the same time, working on your capacity to withstand, these things in terms of resilience, and also make fun of yourself whenever. These are incredibly important skills that can very well be the things that will decide whether an adult is an adaptive, fully functioning adult that is able to withstand inconveniences in life without, falling back into kind of like, spiraling down into depression or anxiety and so on and so forth. I mean, this is one of the best protective factors that we have towards that. Yeah, like seeing things lightly, taking ourselves less seriously. It builds resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Well, I think we're coming to the end of the time that I have you booked, so I do want to respect your time. Is this a good place to start, or is there anything else you wanted to share while I have you here today?
Well, I mean, I think summarizing, what all these things point to, I think the main thing that's always been interesting to me is to shed more light into the intrinsic relationships that dictate both individual and collective health. Yeah, and I think, again, like most of the work tries to, in different levels, get people out of their own heads so they can start seeing themselves in relationship to, or in relation with, and understand, and trying to, I mean, by the end of the day, I guess, since I started my doctoral work, even before that, when I went back into academia and deeper into mental health, my goal had always kind of like been to contribute to a certain paradigmatic shift. Yeah, which maybe sounds out there and bombastic, but the paradigmatic shift is something that is very much needed, particularly within, Western mental health practice. And that paradigmatic shift is to like really start paying much more attention to individuals as interconnected beings that are always in dialogue and interdependent with each other. Mm-hmm. And that regardless of what the neoliberal ethos would say, people can't ever really be fully happy and healthy unless everybody else is also relatively happy and healthy. This is the main truth of interdependence that is not at all considered within the way that we do health and well-being nowadays. Again, because of the hyper-individualistic, compartmentalizing, reductive way of approaching individual suffering and individual well-being, whereas all the intrinsic links amongst people, environments, culture, society get pushed back and oftentimes just rendered invisible. Because it's easier, right? Like the wellness industry thrives on the idea that if you just get enough supplements, or you go to, and I do this too, this is not a personal attack, but if you do enough coaching sessions, or you go to enough retreats, or you just consume and consume and consume more of the different products and services that the wellness industrial complex has to offer, at some point, after you spend all of this time and all of this money, you're going to feel good. Yeah. And just, that's a very small part of the story. And again, because nobody can be really happy and healthy if we're exclusively focused on our own process, our own pain, our own trauma, our own thing. We have to come to a point where we're sufficiently healed, or we're healed enough, and then start also with one eye looking inwards, but then the other eye looking outwards, okay?
Yes.
Well, now that I feel better, now that I can function a little bit better within my immediate surroundings, what can I do to make this world a little bit better for everybody else? Yeah. What can I address in the structural violence that I perceive around me, so that I can also aid and benefit others through my own healing? And this is the one thing that people do often parrot a lot, but they don't get quite right, because they say, right, like, well, if you do your own work, then that's going to ripple outwards. And if you heal and you grow as a person, then that's going to have an immediate impact on your surroundings, because, again, like this idea of trickle-down healing, right? If we heal the people at the top, then that immediately, and this is like, for example, one of the biggest absurdities that I found so far in the ayahuasca world, for example, right? Like whole retreat centers that orient towards working exclusively with CEOs and influential and powerful people. And the big idea is that if you manage to bring healing to the people on the top, then they're suddenly going to change their whole work ethos and, like, implement better Well, I mean, again, like, this is absurd. But the idea behind it is correct, but the implementation of it isn't. Right? It's like, well, yes, it is very important that powerful people heal because they're also part of this network of interdependent relationships that we all are, right? But yeah, so one eye inwards. That's just kind of like the normal maintenance that is needed for ongoing growth, development, introspection, and so on and so forth. How can we, become better people, grow in certain ways? But one eye outwards. Like we're looking at structures, we're looking at like structural violence, we're looking at systems, we're looking at how to actually make things better for other people, and not only get us stuck in this vortex of self-absorption and self-indulgence, and what ends up oftentimes deriving in narcissistic traits. This is a reality.
Yeah, and it can get so nuanced because sometimes when we have one eye inward and one eye outward, that outward eye is actually feeding the inward eye in like this really fucked up narcissistic way, which I've seen. But we don't have to get into that. If I may ask you one final question, is that okay?
Yeah.
So thank you for giving me so much to chew on about, how to really keep that one outward eye. Like there's definitely been a lot of inward eye gazing. And I'm so grateful that, this is going to be something to think about well into the future. You self-proclaimed have a very skeptical and critical view of healing culture and psychedelics and all of it, right? So I'm curious, what value do you like? You still do work in psychedelics, you still see clients, you're still in the space. So what is the value that you see in psychedelics?
I mean, psychedelics are incredible. I do look at the culture around psychedelics very skeptically and critically, but psychedelics as tools, they are probably the most powerful thing that I ever encountered in my life. That's not changed. That never will change, I don't think. I still think that we need better stories. Yeah, like the whole orientation of the criticism, the skepticism, is not about the tools themselves, but about the culture surrounding those tools, about the stories that we tell about them, about the stories that we tell about what they are for, about the way that medicalization is taking away the recreational part of it to kind of like sort of enclose them in a very particular way of utilitarian, if you're not doing healing work with them, then you're wasting them or misusing them, or some sort of like half-baked and half-assed notion that completely devalues the very real needs of having fun and joy and connection, for which these substances are also extremely beneficial. Yeah. But from a therapeutic perspective, I always thought, and I still think, that the main value of them is epistemic. And when I say epistemic, I mean that they show us our reality tunnels. And if we're paying attention, they don't only show us our reality tunnels, but they show us the way that we build those reality tunnels. So when we have a self-awareness of how we construct our view of reality, how do we make sense of information, what is the cultural programming that we carry, then we have much more agency in reconfiguring that and completely shifting our perspective. So when I say epistemic, I also mean perceptual. I think the main benefit that psychedelics can provide people is to allow us to see ourselves and the world and our place in the world from different angles that perhaps weren't available for us beforehand. So we can actually get a much bigger picture of what is that model of the world and what is that model of ourselves that we have built, and whether that's sufficient for us or not. And if not, then how can we actually build better models of reality, better models of identity, better models of interconnectedness, better models of the structures that we want to inhabit, and then, the hard work is ahead of us. Again, like kind of like the classic psychedelic lore, Tim Leary, right? Like once you get the message, hang up the phone. A lot of the problems that we're seeing with psychedelics nowadays is that people don't hang up the phone. They just keep going back and back and back and back to get the same message or to get different messages. But everything pretty much boils down, in my perspective, and working with other people, everything still almost always boils down to the basic building blocks of how we model things. how we make sense of information, what kind of information is available, how do we process that information, and how do we build our perception. And they say that seeing ourselves as others see us is the best gift that we can ever receive, right? Because we're getting a perspective that is non-accessible to us, right? If you were, we don't really know each other that much except the last hour and a half. But, if we were to hang out and we shared more time, and then, after a while you came to me and you're like, hey, I want to be 100% honest and truthful of what is my perception of you. And you share that with me, I might get triggered. I might, whatever. I might get, happy. But the fundamental gift that you're giving me is that you're providing with a unique, irrepeatable window of what I am through the lenses of your perception, model making, cognitive processing, and so on and so forth, that would be inaccessible to me unless you decided to do that. I think psychedelics do that, except we can do that for ourselves in that way, right? We can get that window of perception into our own selves in a way that would be inaccessible to us in any other way.
So well said. Yeah, so well said. They really do that. Adam, thank you so much. Thank you for thank you for triggering me. Yeah, I think I have a lot to integrate, and I'm excited to re-listen to this episode when I edit and to just allow things to land more deeply. But thank you for being someone who is very triggering for people. It's very important work. It is important to trigger people and to be triggered. It's kind of how we grow. So I know it's not easy to do that. And thank you for being a person who is able to really, speak your truth to others and see how it lands for them.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I will catch you in the next episode.